Hello, so welcome to the latest video on my channel. Today what we're building is a full stack contact book application using the latest version of Nextjs, which is version 14, Prisma as our ORM, and we're also deploying this project to Vercel. So here we have the ability to create a contact. We'll start by typing in the contact name and then give the contact an email address. Once we click submit, we'll notice that we're using React hook forms to capture the loading state. And once it is successfully submitted and created, we'll use React hot toast to send a notification back to the user. And from here, if we click on our pagination, we'll see that the latest name and contact email has been added to our contact book. So let's say that we need to update the name or email of this particular contact. So we'll click on the update link. From here, we'll be redirected to the individual contact link page where we have a dynamic form that not only has the ability to update the contact, but it serves as the new contact form. So for this particular user, let's say we captured the email address incorrectly the first time and we left off the 123. Once we click submit, we'll notice that we get a toast notification that the contact has successfully been updated. And if we navigate back to our home page, we'll notice that the contact that we just updated is now reflecting the 123. So we also have the ability to search for a contact, and this is leveraging server-side rendering. So we don't remember the exact name of the person, but we remember that the first name begins with a T. So if we type in the letter T, we'll notice that the contacts based on the name and email, if either one has the letter T within it, it's going to filter it out based on our search criteria. If we add a second character of O, we'll notice that the prior T name or email is no longer listed because it doesn't have an O included in it. But because we've searched for T and O, we're now getting a name and email that reflects both. We also have server-side pagination. Right now we're on page 1 and we have it set up to only display 5 contacts at a time. So if we want to see contacts 6 and 7, we'll click on 2. We'll notice that the 2 button is now highlighted. The 2 link is now highlighted because we're on the second page of our pagination, and we now have the ability to see the contacts that are on this second page. So let's say that we want to delete one of the contacts within our contact list. We can also do so. Once we click on this delete button, and it is successfully deleted, we'll get a notification that the contact has been deleted. And the contact that we deleted is no longer listed within our contact list. And as I mentioned, we'll also walk through on how to deploy this project to Vercel. So if this is something that you think you'd be interested in building, stay tuned and I'm going to walk you through it step by step on how I created this simple CRUD contact book application using Nextjs, Postgres, and Vercel. Okay, so what I have is a open directory in VS Code, and we'll go ahead and start out by installing the Nextjs project in our application. So we'll use npx to create a project, and we'll be using the latest version. So we'll say create next app, and then be sure to include at latest. And since I'm installing it in the current directory, we'll do space and dot. And in this project, we will not be using TypeScript. We'll say yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to the SRC, yes to the app router, and no to the import alias. And let's begin by doing a little bit of cleanup in the application. So we'll remove the boiler code from the page.js within the root directory and replace it with a function named homepage. Inside of the global.css, let's remove the boiler code within it so that all that's left is the Tailwind configuration. And I'm just going to add a little overflow on the x-axis. I'm going to set it to hidden. So for right now, I'm not going to worry about installing a lot of dependencies just yet. We'll kind of add those in as we go along. But let's just go ahead and care for the overall layout of our project. So we'll close out the current page.js file. And inside of the app directory, let's add a folder named website that will be enclosed in parentheses. And within the website, let's move the page.js that's within the app directory inside of the website folder. And we'll just confirm the move. And then inside of website, let's add another file named layout.js, and we'll add the RFCE template, and we'll pass in children, and we'll remove the current layout and replace it with children. So the reason we're doing this is because I just like to keep the code that goes along with the layout in a separate file than the main layout file that is within the app directory. You don't necessarily have to do so. This is just my personal preference. And I want to remove the enter font from Google font, and let's replace it with Poppins. Again, this is personal preference, nothing that is detrimental to the site. And of course, when we're adding Poppins, we'll need to include a weight. I'm just going to add 400. And let's replace the title of this project, and we'll name it the contact book. We'll hit save, and then let's update the enter variable to be Poppins, and we'll replace it within the class name to be Poppins as well. And hit save. And the last thing I want to do is replace the boiler next fave icon. I have a fave icon that I've already downloaded from the free icon generator. I'm going to link it below so you can use it, or you're more than welcome to add your own or just keep it as it is. So all you need to do is just drag it from a directory on your desktop into the folder, and it's going to ask if you want to replace it, and you'll just select yes, and from there you'll have a custom fave icon so that you don't have to use the one from Next. So with all of the layout metadata updated and the font updated, we can go ahead and close out that file. And let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time working on the overall layout of our website. So before we move on and style our layout for the application, I want to add a primary color so that I have a consistent color throughout the app. So the way we'll do so with Tailwind, if you're using it to style your app, you go into the tailwind.config file and just remove the background image that was listed there. And under extend, we're going to add the object of colors. And I just want to add a primary color to the project. The name of this one will be pound 673 AB7. And we'll hit save. And then now we should have a consistent primary color throughout the project. So to begin the styling of our website, let's go ahead and add a directory named components in the root of the project. Inside of components, let's add a file named header.js. So in the header file, we're just going to have a header at the top of our application so that the user knows that they're on our website. So we'll begin by typing in the RFCE template. And let's replace the header component name. Let's replace the header function name with header, but with the capital H. And for right now, let's just save the file so that we can begin to see what we're typing out on screen. And then we'll go back to the layout.js, and let's bring in the header component that we just created. And if you begin to type it in, you should see that you can import it from @components. We'll go ahead and save this file, and then let's spin up the local host just so that we can get something on the screen and we can see what we're typing as we're typing it out. So in the terminal, make sure that you're in the root of the project, type in the command npm run dev. And once your local host is up and going, you should now see the header component right above homepage. That's because we have the header inside of our layout, and this is going to give us a consistent UI experience throughout every page that is within this directory website. So now let's go back to the header.js file and let's begin to add some styling to it. So we can replace the div that's within the return statement and replace it with header. And inside of header, let's give it a class name, and we'll give it some padding on the y-axis of 2 and padding on the x of 4. Then within header, we'll add a nav. And within this is going to set the width of our header. And I don't want it to take up the entire width of the page. I kind of want it to be condensed just to the center since this is a contact book application. So we'll give it a class name of MX Auto. which is setting the margin to auto. And I want to set the max width to screen, and we'll set it to be medium. So this means that we don't want the width of our header to exceed a maximum width of medium. Inside of this nav, we'll add a div, and this is going to set the direction of the content within the header. And we'll give it a class name of flex, item centered, and we'll say justify between. So I'm not going to add anything opposite of the header text for right now. We could come back and add in a theme toggle, or if we want to include some sort of authentication, that could serve as a sign out button on the opposite side of the header. But for right now, we're just going to add in some header text. So inside of this div, we'll pass another div, and we'll give it a H1. And I'm just going to type in, the contact hub, and save this file so we can get something on screen. And as you can see, we now have the padding on the X, and we have some padding on the Y, and you see the contact hub listed on screen. And then right below the H1, we'll include a P tag, and this is going to say your personal online contact organizer. We'll hit save. And now you see the description text right below the header, the title. So I'm going to style it a little bit. So for the H1, we'll give it a class name of title font, and then we'll set the text to be extra large. I want the font boldness to be medium. Then we'll say the text color will be gray. We'll set it to gray 800. Let's hit save, and now you see it updated on screen. And then now let's style the description text. So we'll say inside of the P tag, give it a class name, and we'll say tracking widest. That's going to set the width of the text. And if you hit save, you'll see it kind of spread out. Then we'll say text size is going to be extra small. Then we'll say that this is a title font. And then we'll say the title, we will let the font be medium from a boldness perspective. And we'll give it a margin bottom of 1 just to give it a little bit of space from the bottom. And then once you hit save, now you see that this is the text and the design of our text. And let's just go to a larger view of our local host. And as you can see, the content or the header is now centered in the screen. And you'll notice that home page is outside of the width of the screen. That is because we haven't set a maximum width for it just yet. But the layout or the header of the layout is starting to come along. So this is starting to look good. So now we'll just condense this back down to the normal size so that we can still see the text editor. And for right now, we're done with the header.js file. And we're actually done with the layout.js net as well. So now we'll shift our focus to the page.js. And this will be the main page of our website. It'll basically hold access to everything that we'll like to access within our application. So within this page.js, before we update this to be an asynchronous page or anything, let's just go ahead and fix the design. So we'll replace the div with a section tag, and I'm not going to include anything inside of it from a styling perspective. This is just for semantics. And then inside of the section tag, let's include a div, and we'll give it a class name to set the width. So we'll go ahead and start out just as we did with the header by setting the margin to auto. And then we'll say max width. And I want it to be the same size as the header, so we'll say max width screen of medium. And I'm going to give this a little border, and we'll set the roundness to extra large. We'll hit save, and you'll notice that we now have a border. The home page is gone because I don't have anything typed inside of the div. So we see that the tailwind configuration is working perfectly on the home page. Great. So now I want to care for the overall layout of the content on the page, and we're going to use grid to help us with that. So inside of the div, we'll give it a class name, and we'll start with grid. And on small devices, I want there to be one column. And on medium devices, we want there to be two columns. So we'll go medium grid columns 2. Actually, I'm going to update this to 8, which will give us a little bit more flexibility on the sizing. And you'll see it as we begin to code this out. And I'm going to set the gap to 4 just so that there's a little bit of space between the two grid items. So the first grid item is going to hold the contact form, which will give us the ability to add a new contact. And then the second grid column is going to hold the table and a search bar for our contact list. So let's go ahead and care for the first div first, or the first column, I should say first. And we'll give it a div with a class name, and we'll go column span 1. And then we'll say on medium devices, we want the column to span 2. And we'll give it some padding on the X and Y of 4. And I'll set the border to the right. Sorry about that. BOR, border right. We'll hit save, and you'll notice that we now have a column that has a padding with rounded border edges. So that's great. Then inside of this div, we want to have some text that just lets the user know that this is where they can add a contact. So we'll add another div and we'll say flex. And in this one, we're going to have a title and the actual form. So I'm going to set the direction to column because I want the title to be above the form. And then we'll set the gap to be 2. And this is technically gap on the Y axis is what we're going for, but I'm just going to set gap to 2 so you can get it on the X and Y. So inside of the description or the P tag, we're going to add the text of add contact and just hit save. And as you can see, it is now on the screen, and we'll add we'll add a class name to the P tag. And I just want the tracking to be widest. Then we'll set the text to extra small. We'll give this a title font. We'll set the title to secondary. We'll set the text to secondary. Actually, we don't have a secondary. We'll set the text to primary. And then we'll set the font to medium. We'll hit save, and you'll see that it is now the color that we just added inside of the tailwind.config file, that purplish type color. So that cares for the title of this section. So now we'll just need to add a contact form, and I'm going to bring this in as a separate component. So inside of the components directory, let's add a file named contactform.js. And this will be a client-side form. So I'm just going to mark it as use client at the top, and we'll add the RFCE template, and we'll go contact form. We'll save this file, and then let's import it inside of the home page. I'm going to go contact form. Then we'll hit save. And then now we see the contact form listed here on the screen. So that's great. Before we update this code, let's go ahead and build out the rest of our table or the rest of our contact page layout. So outside of the contact form, there should be a closing div. And then there's going to be one more div which holds this column. We want to go outside of that div and underneath it add a new div. And then inside of this div, we'll give it a class name of column span 1. So on small devices, we want it to span 1. And on medium devices, we want it to span 6, because this is going to be the largest section of the 2 grid columns. And then we'll also give this a padding of 4 for consistency. We'll go ahead and save the file, and we won't notice anything just yet. Now we'll add another div, and inside of it, we'll give it a class name of flex. We'll set the direction to column, and we'll give it a gap of 8. And we won't notice anything on screen just yet because we haven't typed in any content. So inside of this div, let's add another div, and this one is going to hold the search portion of the website or the container. So we'll go ahead and add in a H2 that just says search. We'll hit save, and you see we have it listed on screen. And then underneath the search, let's add a P tag, and we'll say search by name or email, and hit save. And then we have it listed there. And then let's just style the H2. We'll give it a class name of title font. We'll set the text to be large, which is the size of the text. We'll add the font boldness to be medium. And we'll say text gray 800, which will set the color. Hit save. There we go. All right, so we see that we have the search text updated. Now inside of the P tag, let's add a class name, and we'll say tracking widest. Actually, you know what? I want it to be the exact same as this P tag, so we'll just grab this text. Hit save, and then now we see search, and we can search by name or email. And then underneath this, I want to add in a search bar, so we'll add it as a separate component. So inside of the root directory, go to components, and we'll just add search bar component.js, or inside of components, excuse me. And this will be a client-side file as well, so we'll mark it as use client. We'll create a search bar function. Hit save. And back in the page.js, underneath the P tag, let's bring in that search bar. Hit save, and then you see search bar listed there. Great. So now underneath this div, inside of the same column, we want to add a table or the contact list. So we have the div, we have the search bar component. Then we have one div that's going to hold the actual search bar area. And then the next div underneath it is the direction of the information that's going to be listed. So outside of those two divs, we want to add another div. So I tell you what, outside of the search bar component, we want to go underneath the closing div that's outside of the H2, the paragraph, and the search. Underneath it, we want to add another div, and this div is going to hold the contact list. So inside of the components directory, let's add another component named contact list.js, and we'll give it a RFCE template, and let's replace contact list with the new contact list. And for me, I just have the C and L capitalized. Hit save and go back to the page.js file, and let's bring in the contact list component that we just created. And as you can see, it is listed there. And if we go to a large view, you'll see that this is the current layout. We have the add contact form on the right. We're going to have the search area listed here, and then we're going to have a contact table listed underneath that. So great. So now that we have the structure of our application built, let's go ahead and establish our connection to Prisma and add in the ability to create a new contact so that we can begin to see it in the database and have a contact list displayed here. So we'll work on that next. Next up, we'll need to establish a connection to our database. And we're going to be using a PostgreSQL database, and Prisma will be the ORM. So in the terminal, let's just go ahead and stop it for right now. And I'm going to make sure this is visible. And let's type in the command npm i-d and then Prisma. Next, we want to install the Prisma client. So we'll go npm i at Prisma/client. Now we'll need to initialize Prisma and establish a Prisma directory. So we'll go npx Prisma init. And within the root directory, we should now have a folder named Prisma with a file named schema.prisma within it. First, I want to go ahead and add the .env file to .gitignore. That way, once this is on GitHub, the .env file is secure and not included. And we'll close out the .gitignore file. And then what we'll want to do is update our database source with the information to connect to a Vercel database. So in the browser, if you go to vercel.com and log in, they have the ability to establish a free account. But once you're logged into Vercel or you have an account established, go ahead and click on storage. And what we want to do is create a database. The type of database that we want to create is a Postgres serverless SQL database. Then we'll click create and we'll click on accept. And it's going to ask us to name the database. And I'm just going to name it my contact hub. But feel free to name it whatever you like. And then we'll need to select the region that's closest to us. And I've selected the one that's closest to me. And click on create. And it's going to say that we have successfully added a PostgreSQL database. So now we want to grab the connection from the database and add it to our project. So once you're inside of your My Contact Hub or the database that you just created, go ahead and click on Storage. And from Storage, if you come down to the bottom under Quick Start, you then want to click on the .env.local. And these are the environment variables that we want to store within our project. So go ahead and click on Copy Snippet. And if we go back to VS Code, let's go to the .env file first. And let's update the database URL so that it now points to the PostgreSQL database that we have on Vercel. And if we click on Prisma, the database source, we want to copy this source as it's going to point back to the database versus what we currently have within the project. And once you copy that code, let's close out the .env file and we'll click on the schema.prisma. And we'll just update the database source to reflect the source information that we got from the Vercel project. Now, since we're in the schema.prisma file, let's go ahead and create the model to help us organize the data within our database. So we'll only have one model for this project, and the name of the model will be contact. And we'll start with a ID, and it will be a string. And we'll include an ID and mention that this is the default CUID. Our contact will also have a name, and it will be stored as a string. We'll want the ability to have a phone, which will represent a phone number, and we'll mark this as a string as well. And I think that'll be fine for what we want to store within the database. Actually, instead of phone, let's make this an email. We'll make this more like an email contact book. And then we'll say created at. And we'll grab the date time and we'll say at default and pass in now. Be sure to call it. And we'll also want to capture the updated at. That'll be date time. And then we'll go at updated at. So let's go ahead and save this file and we can close it out. So now the last thing that I want to do before we push this information to our database is to establish the Prisma client. So we've already installed the dependency. Now we just need to add the function to our project. Well, in the root directory, let's add a folder named lib, and inside of it, a file named prisma.js. And it helps if I spell it correctly. And I'm just going to paste in this connection function. You can actually copy it directly from the Prisma documentation. but basically it's just bringing in the Prisma client. And if there's not the connection to Prisma, it's going to establish one, and just make sure that it runs efficiently. So let's go ahead and save this file, and we can close it out because we're not going to need it again. And if we head back to the terminal, let's type in the command npx prisma db push. And as you can see, the database is now in sync with our Prisma schema. And then last but not least, let's type in the command npx prisma generate. Too many S's there. Prisma generate, and press enter. So next, what I want to do is in a separate terminal, let's type in the command npx prisma studio. And this is just going to give us access to the Prisma Studio so that we can take a look at our models and schema within the database versus using Vercel. So just to confirm that everything was set up properly, if we click on contact, we see that we have the model fields of ID, name, email, create at, and updated at. And I actually misspelled, or I see I left off the D for create at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the Prisma Studio for right now. Let's go back to the schema.prisma file and let's add the D. It probably shouldn't matter, but I just want to make sure that it is correct. We'll save this and then we'll run npx in the terminal, npx prisma db push. Okay, sync successfully, and then we'll type npx prisma generate. All right, and now we will run the Prisma Studio to make sure that everything is updated correctly. So we'll type npx prisma studio, and it takes us back to the contact schema, and as you can see, the created at and updated at is correct, and we also have name and email. Perfect. So I'll go ahead and close that out for right now, and with that we have established our connection to Prisma. So the next thing that we'll work on is having the ability to add a contact from our contact page. So that means we'll be building out the contact form and all of the features next. So now that we have our connection established to Prisma, the next thing we want to do is create the functions, or the server actions, I should say, to have the ability to interact with our database, specifically the ability to create and update a contact. So let's just go ahead and close out all of the current files that we have open. And in the root directory, let's click on the lib folder and let's add a file named addcontact.js. So we're at the point now where we want to establish a connection to the database, and usually in prior versions we would use an API, but in this video I'm using server actions so that we can interact with our database. So let's start by marking this file as use server, and then we want to import Prisma, and this is coming from the .prisma file that we just established. And now we want to create a function that's going to interact with our database and create a contact based on the contact model. So we'll create a function named addContact. And what we want to pass into the contact is event data. And within this function, we'll have a try-catch block. And first up, what we want to do is destructure the information from the event data. And what we'll be destructuring is a name and email, because that's the information that we're saving for our contacts in the database. And once we have that data destructured, let's create a variable named new contact, and we're going to set it equal to await Prisma. And with the Prisma client that we created in a separate directory, what we want access to is the contact model. And from Prisma, we want to use the .create method. And what we want to create is a contact with the data that's being passed in from event data that we destructured, and that data is the name and email. And then if all goes well, what we want to do then is return new contact so that we'll have access to it in the browser, and we'll have the ability to send a notification to the user that it was created successfully. And in the event that we get an error, we want to certainly log it to the console. So we'll say new contact error, and then we will go error so that we can see it. And let's just save the file. This really should be all that we need. And while we're here, let's go ahead and add another file within the lib directory named update contact, update-contact.js. And we can actually copy the data from the add contact file and paste it into the update contact file. We'll just make a few changes. So instead of it saying add contact, we'll change the name to update contact. And we're still going to pass in event data, but what we want to destructure first, or include within destructuring, is the ID. The reason being is because we'll need a way to uniquely identify the contact that needs to be updated. And we'll change the name of new contact. We'll change this to adjust contact just to keep it simple. And instead of create, we'll just go with update. And we'll be passing in first where. Anytime that we use where with Prisma, we need to pass in the ID. And the reason we're passing in this ID is because this is going to give us the ability to find the correct contact and update it based on the data that's being sent to it. So outside of the where object, be sure to add a comma so that you get rid of the error. And if you save the file, but before we close it out, be sure to change the name from new contact to adjust or ADJ contact, and so that we can distinguish the error. And we're, for accuracy purposes, instead of it saying new contact error, just say update contact error. All right, so then we can go ahead and save this file and close it out. And with that, now we want to shift our focus to the front end and updating our contact form so that we have the ability to create or update a contact. So now that we have the ability from a server perspective to add and update a contact, let's establish that ability on our page.js. And the way we're going to establish it on the front end is by updating our contact form. So back in the root directory, let's click on the components folder and the file named contactform.js. And before we update this form, let's go ahead and add a few dependencies. So what we want to use in order to improve the user experience and update our form is React Hook Form. That's going to help us manage the state of our form and show pending state and error state. We're going to use hook form resolvers and yep. This is going to make sure from a validation perspective that we're sending strings to our backend. And we're going to use React Hot Toast to help with notifications. In the event that we create or update a form successfully, we want to send that back to the user. Or if we aren't able to create or update that form successfully, we want to let the user know. So with that, let's just go ahead and install these dependencies now. And once they're installed, let's go ahead and type in the command npm run dev to start our server back on localhost. And let's just refresh the page to make sure that it's working. And it appears to be successfully. So let's go ahead and update this file so that we'll have the ability to either create or update a contact depending upon what page we're on in order to utilize it. So first, let's update our imports. So first up, let's bring in use form. Use form and controller from React Hook Form. Then we want to bring in the Yelp resolver. And that's going to come from @hook form resolvers. Then we want to import Yelp, and we want to bring in the entire library. So we're going to use the asterisk, and then we'll say, asterisk as Yelp with a capital P. And this is going to come from Yelp. Then we'll want to bring in our React hot toast, and we'll be bringing in toaster and toast. This is coming from React hot toast. Finally, we'll want to bring in the server actions that we created, and the two that we created were add contact and update contact. Okay. So with those imports out of the way, now we're ready to start to build out some of the function. First, we'll need to create a schema. And we'll set this equal to yelp.object. And we want to call shape. And within the shape, we want a name. And this will be a string. And if the user doesn't include it, we want to say name is required. And we'll also want to do the same thing for email. And remember, the email is going to be stored as a string as well. And for this one, we'll have an extra piece of validation. If it doesn't include an @ symbol, we're going to say invalid email. And if the user just leaves it blank, then we'll say required, and we'll say email is required. Okay, now let's save the file. Now inside of the contact form, the first thing we want to do is bring in contact or pass in contact. And we're going to use this exact same form to update the contact. So if there's a contact, we'll just be sure to find it by the params ID, find the contact, and then pass it into this form. And I'll show you how we're going to do it on the individual contact page. Now within the contact form function, we want to bring in the use form, which is coming from React hook form. So we'll just type out const, and we'll include the destructure brackets, and we'll say use form. And then inside of it, we want to grab the resolvers, and we'll say Yelp resolver. And then what we'll pass into the resolver is the schema that we just created. And then inside of use form, we'll also pass in the default values. And this is going to be, if there's a contact, we want to pass in the default value. And we're going to say the name is going to equal contact.name. And then for email, we'll say email is going to be equal to contact.email. All right. And let's save this file. And after the curly brackets, and what this is saying, after that, the initial curly brackets that we created, we'll say or, and we'll pass in some empty brackets in the event that there isn't anything there. We just want to make sure that it's empty. And then inside of the const, we want to pass in handle submit, control, reset, and also form state. And I know we're getting an error right now, but that is okay. We'll be able to correct it in just a moment. So what we're basically doing with this code is we're grabbing the use form hook from React hook forms, and we want to destructure the handle submit, control, reset, and form state from that hook. And we're passing in the resolver and the default value, just basically saying we want to use this schema to validate the data from contact. And from contact, we should be capturing the name and email. And if we don't get any values, then we just want to pass in an empty object. What we'll do next is we'll want to destructure some information from form state. And what we'll be destructuring from it is errors and is submit. Or is submitting. And what we'll be destructuring from the form state is errors and is submitting. And basically what that's saying is that if there are any errors, we want to send it back to the browser. And we also want to capture if it is submitting, because if it is, then we want to show pending in that state. So now we'll need to utilize the onSubmit function. And we'll say asynchronous and pass in data. And then inside of this function, we want a try catch block. And what we'll say first is that if there's a contact, we want to await update contact, the function that we created earlier. And what we'll pass in to the update contact as its form data is an ID, which will serve as the contact ID. And then we'll also want to destructure the data. And if all goes well, we want to send a toast notification, and that's coming from React Hot Toast, which we have imported. And we'll say toast.success, and we'll say contact updated. And we'll also want to refresh the window. So we'll say window.location. Actually, we'll redirect the user back to the home page. So we'll say redirect. We'll bring that in from next navigation, and we'll redirect the user back to the / endpoint. And we probably should refresh the window just to be safe. Window.location.reload. Okay, that looks good. And then inside of the if, or after the if, excuse me, we want to pass an else. And we'll say await add contact. So in the event that we're not using the update function, then we want to use the add contact function. And we'll pass in the data, of course, which will be sent back as form data to our backend. And we'll just say toast.success. We'll say new contact added. And then because this is on the home route, we'll just go window.location.reload just to refresh the page. And then we'll want to capture, or we'll want to reset the form so that that data is not still being captured within the form. And we're going to use reset from the use form hook. And then finally, if we happen to get an error, let's send it back to the browser. So we'll say toast error, and we'll say error submitting form. And then we'll want to pass in the error. So now if we save this file, actually I've realized this should be including Yelp. Sorry about that. All right, sorry, when we import it, be sure that you include /Yelp at the end. I just realized that when I looked at it, I was like, wait a minute, it shouldn't be still erroring right now. And the reason is because I didn't include the Yelp at the end. So that's my apologies. But this should be the onSubmit function that we're going to use with handle submit and pass into the form. And we're basically just saying we want to use the schema. We want to validate the schema to make sure that we're passing in strings. If it is a contact that's being passed in, then we know that we want to use the update contact function, which is what we're saying right here. Otherwise, we're going to be using the add contact function that we created. And if it is successful, we want to send toast notifications, reload the page, and in the update function, or excuse me, in the update portion of the if statement, we're going to redirect the user back to the home page. And if we're already on the home page, then we just want to refresh that page. That way we see the new data within the table. So now that we have that function created, let's focus on the return statement. So we'll remove the word contact form so that we just have the div here. And inside of it, we'll pass in the div, and we'll give the div a onSubmit function. And what we want to pass in is handle submit, and we'll be calling onSubmit that we just created. That's what we want to use to submit or handle the submission of the form. And then inside of the form, let's pass in a div, and we'll include a span, and we'll say name, save the file, and we see it updated on the window. And outside of that span, let's include, actually, we need to include controller. And controller is coming from React Hook form. It's just basically going to allow us to render out the input and use some of the built-in error functionality that's within the controller. So we'll go ahead and close controller. And actually, this should be a self-closing tag, not a one that we would pass anything into. And inside the controller, we'll go name is equal to name. And we'll say control. And we want to pass in control. Then we'll say render. And what we're going to render is the field. So we'll say bracket, field. And then we'll come outside of the, actually, this should be, parentheses, then bracket, and we want to pass in field to represent the field that we're going to pass in. Then we'll come outside of the parentheses and we'll create the arrow function there, and then we'll pass in input. And inside of input, we want to pass in field, and be sure that you're destructuring it. And then we'll just style it a little bit by going class name width of full. We'll give it border. We'll say rounded is medium, padding on the Y of 2, padding on the X of 3. Then we'll say the text color will be gray 800. And we'll say leading type. Focus, and I don't see it. We'll go focus. I want the focus to be outline none. And then we'll say shadow. DOW outline. Okay. And we'll hit save. And we see the name input. And now we see the name input. Once we hit save, we'll hit save. And then now we see the name input listed there. And we could just copy this and do the same thing for email with a few modifications. Hit save and change it from name to email. And the name for this one will be email. Control will remain the same, field will remain the same, and that will remain the same. Great. So underneath the input, I do want to include the ability to show errors. So we'll go errors.name, and we'll say and we'll pass the message back to the user as a span, and we'll say errors.name.message. And I'll style it just a little bit. Go class name. Text red. We'll go 600. We can actually copy this and paste it underneath the email field as well. So instead of it saying errors.name, we'll say errors.email. And right here, we'll go errors.email. Okay. And then with the inputs cared for, next up, we want to have a way to submit the request. So we'll need to add a button. button. And then inside of the button, I'm just going to pass in if it is submitting, which is what we gained access to earlier from the form state. If it is submitting, then we want to show submitting to the user. And then if it's not, then what we want to show is submit. And be sure to add a or right there. Then we'll hit save. And inside the button, we'll need to pass in a little bit of information as well. First, let me style it so that it looks a little better. Right now, it's a little hard to see. So to give it some style, I'm just going to go margin top. Probably ought to pass this in like this, and we're going to use temporal literals for this because we're going to need to pass in some dynamic information. Sorry about that. That was my mistake. So first, we'll start off by giving it a margin top of 2 to move the submit button down. Then we'll give it a width of full, and we'll set the background color to primary. And if we hit save, you see that we have the button looks a little better on screen. I'm going to go rounded of medium, which is consistent with the input roundness. We'll give it a padding on the Y of 2, padding on the X of 3. And I think I want the text color to be white. And then what we want to do next is pass in some information dynamically. So if it is submitting, I want to change the opacity to 50, and then cursor, we'll go cursor. It should be one that's not allowed. Yep. And side of that, and then we'll just pass in if we're not in the submitting state, then we just want it to be a normal empty string showing the submit button. So outside of that, we're going to go disabled, and then we'll say is disabled. We want is submitting to be disabled. So if we save this file, the last thing, let me not forget, is the toaster. That way we'll know that the user will know that we have successfully created a contact. And I'm just going to position it top center. And now we'll save the file, and let's just try to create a contact and see what we get. So in the name, I'm going to type Jace, J-A-C-E. And in the email field, I'm going to type jace@gmail.com and hit submit. We get submitting. We get the toast notification. We get the page reload. Now let's check the database to see if it is showing up. So we'll go to localhost 555, well, 4 5s, excuse me. And it's going to take us to the Prisma interface. And you see we have the ability to see the new contact. So it is created within the database. Now let's see if the update form portion is working. So the first thing I want to do is create the route for it. And inside of website, let's just create a route name ID that will be enclosed in brackets. So we'll say ID, open bracket, ID, close bracket. And then inside of it, let's create a file named page.js. And I'm going to add the RFCE template. Let's name this page single contact. Hit save, and we'll pass in params because we're going to send over the information to this page once we click on it. And what we want to destructure from params is the ID. So we'll say const ID is equal to params.id. And just to test this out, I'm going to go to localhost/ID just to see what I get. So I'm going to go back to the Prisma Studio and copy the ID. And then we'll open up another tab to go to the localhost. And we'll say localhost 3000/ID that we just copied. And as you can see, it is taking us to the single contact page. And let me make sure that let's make sure that we are capturing this ID. So I'm going to pass it to the div to make sure it's being captured. Yep, and it is being captured. So the next thing we want to do is turn this page into an asynchronous function, or asynchronous because we want to use Prisma to help us find that individual contact by its ID. So underneath the ID, we'll say const and create a variable named contact. And we're going to set it equal to await Prisma. And be sure you're importing the Prisma from the lib directory. and we'll say Prisma.contact, which is the name of the model that we'll be accessing, or the schema. And we want to find unique, UNIQUE. And what we want to find is the unique ID by the contact. So we'll say, we want to find the unique contact by the ID that we passed over. So we'll say where the ID is equal to ID. Then we'll hit save, and we'll come down outside of this contact, and we'll say if if no contact, we want to redirect the user using next navigation back to the home page. And let's just make sure that we are getting the contact. So we'll say contact.name. And you see that it is showing Jace, which is the name of the contact. So let's go ahead and remove the code within the div. And inside of that div, let's add another div, and let's give it a class name of mxauto. And we'll say the max width will be medium so that the sizing of this is consistent. And then let's pass in the contact form that we created. And what we want to pass in is contact, because we actually have a contact. And if we save this file, we'll see that the form is now showing the contact information of the single contact that we found by the ID. And to make sure that the update portion is working, at the end of Jace, I'm going to add goat and hit submit. But we're getting an error, so let's see if we can figure out why we're getting the error. I don't think we logged the error to the console, so let's see. We'll go back to contact form. And I'm going to just console.log this error. We'll remove the S. It was an error redirecting. So let me remove this redirect altogether and just go with the reload. I think because we're using server actions. There we go. All right, so if you remove the redirect, and we can remove the redirect from at the top of the file as well. Just hit save. And we see that it is updated in the form. And we see that it is updated in the database. So sorry about that. So once we remove the redirect, that took care of it. And if we refresh the page, let's just add a couple more S's to Jace Goat. Hit submit. It is updated. Refresh the page, it looks good there. And now if we update the database, we now have 3 S's there as well. So, okay, now that we have the ability to create and update contacts, the next thing we want to do is have the ability to get all contacts and also have the ability to search. And then we'll also build the ability to delete contacts. So we'll work on that next. So the next thing that I want to do before we create our get contacts function is to update our search bar and to also add a pagination component. And it'll make more sense because when we build out the get contacts function, we won't have to duplicate our efforts. We'll be able to kind of let it flow. And then the last thing we'll do is build a contact list. So let's go ahead and build out the search bar component next. So inside of the root directory, let's click on the components folder and the file name search bar dash page, search bar dash, and click on the file name search dash bar.js. And within it, we currently have a search bar component that is marked as a client side component. So before we begin to bring in some of our imports, I do want to have the ability to add an icon, and we'll be using React icon to help us out with that. So inside of the terminal, let's type in the command npmi react-icons and press enter. And now that I think about it, we'll also need one additional dependency. This one is called the bounce. And to install it, type in npm I use use.b debounce use dash the bounce. Press enter. This is just going to help us with the search functionality so that when we make our queries, they're more precise, and it's not reacting too soon to the search query that we make. So with those two dependencies installed, let's go ahead and bring in some imports. So first I want to bring in React icons. So that'll be from react-icons, and I'm using the FI icon, and I want to use the search icon from the library. And then next we'll bring in a couple additional imports from Next Navigation. Next-navigation. The first import that I want to bring in is use search params. The next one is going to be use path name. And the last one will be use router. So the use search param will be to kind of help manage the search query. The use search param will be to help manage the search queries that we make from the URL. The path name is going to help us get the current page path name when we build it out. And the use router is going to help us with navigation so that we can route based on what we are querying in the URL. All right, and so with those, now we're ready to update the actual search component. So within search bar, let's go ahead and get access to the use search params. Let's go ahead and get access to the use search params and create a variable named search params and set it equal to use search params, and be sure to call it by including the parentheses at the end. Next, we want to get access to path name, so we'll say use path name is equal to use path name. Be sure to call it. And then last and certainly not least, we want to get access to replace, and this is going to come from use router. Next, we want to create a function that's going to handle the search queries, and we'll call this function handle search, and we'll set it equal to use the bounce callback. And what we want to pass in is a item, and then inside of it, we want to make this the brackets, and then inside of it we want to go const params is equal to new URL search params, and we want to pass in search params. And then inside of it, underneath it, we want to go params.set. And what we want to set is the page. And we'll set the number to 1. And then we'll say if term params.set. And what we want to set is the query. And we'll pass in term. That should be outside of it. Okay. And then else, we want to say params.delete. And what we want to delete is the query. We'll go ahead and hit save. And then underneath the else statement, inside of or in between the close bracket and close parenthesis, we want to type in replace. And what we want to replace is the path name. So we'll go replace parentheses, and then temporal literals because this is going to be dynamic. And then we want to go $. We'll go path name with a question mark. And we'll pass in another $, brackets, and then we'll go params dot toString. And be sure to call it. And then we want to pass in the time, and the time is going to be 300. Oh, I think I have this in the wrong spot. Sorry about that. And we need to move this. And we'll place it here. And we'll go 300. And this is basically setting the... So what we have is we're going to use the bounce callback to wrap the search handle function. And we want to delay the execution of it by 300 seconds. And inside of the handle search function, we're basically just updating the params object with the current search parameters. So like if it is a blank and then it goes to J, and then we want to set the page parameter to 1 to start from the first page of the results. Now let's go ahead and update our return. So I'll just remove this div and replace it with a div, and inside of it give it a class name, and we'll go relative flex -1. And then inside of the div, excuse me, let's add an input. And the input type will be text. And we'll give it a class name of width full. We'll give it a border and set that border color to gray 800. Give it a little padding on the Y of 2. We'll say padding left of 10. We'll set the text to small, outline, and we'll set the outline to 2, and we'll set the rounded to medium. Okay, and we'll give it a placeholder of search with 3 dots, and the onChange function, and we'll pass in a event, and we want it to handle the handle search, and then we'll pass in e.target.value to represent the value of the search. Then we'll set the default value to search params dot I think it's dot get, yep, query, and make sure that we are returning this as a string. And we'll go ahead and save it. And you see the search bar there. So now I just want to add the search icon right underneath it. So we'll go fi search. And then inside of it, we'll give it a class name of absolute. And we'll go left 3, top of 2, a width of 4, a height of 4, and we'll set the text color to gray. We'll make this one 500 and close it off. There we go. Actually, I'm gonna set it to 5, make it a little bigger. There we go. That's much better. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. So basically what this is a search component. We'll integrate some search functionality by using the URL management within Nextjs hooks. This is going to make it a little easier. There's a few different ways we could have went about it, but I thought this is probably the most efficient way to use server-side search, or to use server actions for search. So let's go ahead and save and close out this file. Now the next file that we want to create is a function that's going to allow us to manage the page number of our components. So inside of the lib directory, let's create a file named generate pagination.js. And what this is going to do, we're just going to create a function named generate pagination and set it equal to the current page and total pages. And within this function, we're going to say if the total pages is greater than, or excuse me, less than or equal to 7, then we want to return an array from length total pages, and we want to come outside of the brackets and create a parentheses and go underscore I, and outside of those parentheses and go I plus 1. Okay. And then underneath this function, we'll say if the current page is less than or equal to 3, then we want to return an array of 1, 2, 3. And we want the 3 dots to show that there are more pages or that there's more pagination. And then we want the total pages, and we'll say -1 total pages. Okay. And then underneath that if statement, we'll pass another one. We'll say if the current pages is greater than or equal to total pages, -2. Then we want to pass in a return, and actually we can just copy this same one and paste it in, and then we'll say return 1, 2, 3 total pages -2, and then we'll say total pages then we'll say total pages -1, and then we'll go total pages. Hit save. And then underneath that if statement, we want to return the actual pagination. So we'll say return, and it'll be an array, and we'll go 1 parenthesis, or excuse me, comma, double quotation, 3 dots, and then after that, then we'll go current page -1, and then we'll go current page, and then we'll go current page +2, excuse me, +1, and then underneath it we'll go parentheses with 3 dots, and then go comma and go total pages. Hit save. All right, so basically what we have, it may be making sense to you already, but we just have a function that's going to generate the pagination, and it's going to determine which page number to display based on the current page that's being passed in and the overall total pages. If the total pages is 7 or fewer, we want to return the array of page numbers from 1 to the total number of pages. If it is, if the current page is less than or equal to 3, we want it to show the first 3 pages, and then the 3 dots or an ellipse. An ellipsis, I believe, is the correct pronunciation of it, but basically you want to show 3 dots and the last 2 pages. If the current page is within 2 pages from the end of total pages -2 or more, we want it to show the first 3 pages and an ellipse or the 3 dots. Otherwise, it's going to show the first page and and the three dots or the previous page, the current page, the next page, and ellipse in the last page. So I know I said quite a bit there, but I hope it kind of makes sense to you, and it'll probably make more sense to you as we build it out. So next, let's just go ahead and build out the pagination component. So we'll close out this file, and inside of components, let's add a page named pagination.js. And for this particular component, I'm actually going to just paste in the code that we're going to need for it. Okay, so we have the function to create the pagination number, and it's basically just taking in the page, the href position, and if it is active or not. And then from there, we're just using some JavaScript to do some basic if-else statements. You could have done a switch statement, but I just chose if-else to keep it simpler for me. And then from there, just doing a return statement to return the position and the page number as a link. And then we have the page arrows if you want to use the arrow versus a link. The functionality is very similar. The biggest difference is that it's using an icon to go from left to right versus having the ability to select an exact number. And then inside of the return statement, we're creating some reusable components for the page arrow, or accessing these functions, for the page arrow, setting the direction, the href, and we're doing the same thing for the page number. And then we are mapping over all of the pages and displaying the position and based on if it is first, last, or if it is in the middle. And then finally, we have the other page arrow, which is representing the right. In the event that we want an arrow to the right, we have that ability once we bring it into the contact list. So let's just go ahead and save this file, and we'll close it out. And then the next file that we want to create is the server action, which is going to give us the ability to query our database and get all contacts based on the page number and search results. So inside of the root directory, let's click on lib, and let's create a file named getcontacts.js. Okay, so within this file, we want to create the function that's going to allow us to get all contacts by search parameters, and also by leveraging our pagination, because we're doing server-side pagination. So first, we'll start by marking this file as use server. Then we'll bring in Prisma, the Prisma client. And the first variable I want to create is items per page, and I'm going to set it equal to 5. You could change this number, but I'm just going to set it to 5 to keep it simple. Then we'll create a function named getContacts, and we'll pass in the query and the current page number. And we'll create a variable named offset and set it equal to the current page minus 1 multiplied by the items per page. And then we'll pass in a try catch block within the getContacts function. And we'll say, of course, this will be and the contacts will be set equal to await prisma.contact find many. And within it, we want to pass in skip, and the skip we're going to set equal to offset, and the take we're going to set equal to items per page. And we'll say where, and where the name contains the query, and the mode we'll set to insensitive. And then if all goes well, we want to return contacts. And if for some reason we get an error, we want to be sure to log it to the console and throw a new error as well. The next function we want to create is getContactsPages, is the getContactPages. And we'll pass in a query and a try catch block. And this is just going to set the contacts count. And we'll say where the name, we'll say where and pass in or, and we'll say name contains query and set the mode to insensitive as well. And then we'll create a variable named total pages and set it equal to the total number of contacts divided by the items per page. And we want to round this number up. And then once we capture it and we have that information, just want to be sure to return total pages. And if we get an error, we'll log into the console and be sure to throw a new error as well. So let's go ahead and save this file. And next we want to update the contact list. So now that we have all of our backend functionality in place to get our contacts and contact lists, let's go ahead and update the get contact list component. So inside of the components directory, let's click on the file named contactlist.js. And we'll start by bringing in the get contacts function that we created. Then we'll want to bring in link from nextlink. And I think that should be all the imports that we'll need within this file. Next, let's go ahead and pass in the query and current page. That way we can add in the information. That way we can add this information to the get contacts function that we created just a minute ago. Then we'll create a variable inside of the contact list named contacts and set it await get contacts. And with this, we want to pass in the query and the current page. Let's go ahead and save this file. And of course, right now it is saying that it is unable to fetch those contacts. And let's go back to, let's go ahead and correct this error. So in the home page, we'll need to update this a little bit. Let's add that this is a asynchronous function. And then we'll pass in search params. And within this function, let's go ahead and create a variable named query. And this will get access to search params. And then we want to pass in the question mark. And then we'll say dot query. Or it'll be an empty string. Then we'll say const current page is equal to number. And then we'll pass in search params dot page or 1. And then we'll say const total pages is equal to await get contact pages. And be sure you're importing that function from the lib directory that we created a minute ago. And then when we call it, we want to pass in the query. Okay, so let's just go ahead and save this. And for the contact list, let's pass in query. And within it, it'll be query. And then we'll say current page is equal to current page and hit save. All right, now that removes the error. And let's go ahead and bring in the pagination as well. So underneath this closing div that holds the contact list, excuse me, let's create another div and give it a class name of flex. And we'll say justify center, item centered. And then within this one, let's pass in the pagination component that we created. And then we'll pass in total pages and set it equal to total pages. Okay, and for right now, as you can see, we have 1, we have the left arrow, the right arrow, and the 1 is highlighted because technically we only have 1 contact in the database and that would only be on 1 page. So great. Now let's go back to the contact list and we can close out the page.js file. We shouldn't need it anymore. So now we just need to update this contact list and we should have full visibility to our contact list data. Okay, and yes, we're getting an error because we don't have anything in the return statement. So we'll start with a table and we'll give a class name with a width of full, set the text to small, we'll align the text to the left and set the color to 500. Then we'll pass in a table head and set the text of it to small and make some minor, we'll pass in a table head, give it a class name with some styling as well. Within the table head, we want a table row. And the first row, we want to have a table head of name, email, and actions. And you see it aligned here at the bottom. Then we want to pass in the table body outside of the table head. Inside of the body, we want to map over the context that we are getting from the get contacts function. And for every contact, we want to create a table row and pass in a key. And of course, the key is going to be the contact.id. And we want to be able to display the contact name and email within that row. And we'll also create another table detail. And within it, we're going to pass in the link. And the link will be to update. And we set the href to /ID, which represents the ID page that we created earlier. And if we save this file, and let's just click on update, you see that we are redirected to the individual contact page that has the name and email. And just to make sure it's still working, if we remove two of the S's and click submit, we got the toast notification. And if we go back to the home page and refresh it, just to be sure, we see that the name only has one S now versus the two. So the next thing I want to do is make sure that the search and the pagination functionality is working. So let's just go ahead and create a few more additional contacts. Okay, so now that we have 6 contacts, you see that we will go full screen for just a moment. You see that we now have the second pagination button showing up. So if we click on 2, we see that we're redirected to the second page. We see that the number 2 button or component is now highlighted and distinguished that we're on the second page. And we see that the arrow now points back to the left. And if we press the left button, it takes us back to the first pagination. 2 is no longer distinguished, and we have the ability to go to the right. Now let's see or make sure that the search functionality is working. So I'm going to type in Frank. And as you can see, we're getting an error. And it is saying that the word term is not defined. So let's check that out. And go back to let's go back to the components folder, click on search bar. And okay, I have item listed here. Let's change this to term. Let's click save and go back. And I begin to type in FR, it brings up Frank. Great. If I type in ED, it brings up Ed. I type in T for Tommy. You see we get all of the name and email that has a T in it. So the J scope, Stanks, and Tommy. And if I do TA, it just leaves Stanks. If I do TO, it just leaves Tommy. And TS gives J scope. So great. So the search functionality and pagination is working properly. Great. So the search functionality and pagination is working properly. The last thing that we want to do is have the ability to delete a contact. So let's go ahead and work on it now. So we'll close out the search bar.js, and within the lib directory, let's create a file named delete contact.js. We'll start by marking this file as use server. And we'll bring in Prisma from Prisma, or excuse me, from the Prisma file that we created within the lib directory. Then let's create a function named export async function. And let's create it, or name it delete contact, I should say, excuse me. And we want to pass in event data. And we'll have a try catch block. And we'll go ahead and say ID is equal to event data, because that's the data that should be passed in. And then we'll say, we'll create a variable named delete con is equal to await prisma.contact.delete. And we'll say where the ID is equal to ID. And then outside of that variable, let's return delete con. Okay. And then inside of the catch, yes, let's pass a console.log error deleting. And we'll just pass in the error. All right, so great. So now we'll need to create a delete contact button. So back in the components directory, let's create a file named delete contact, or delete contact. Yes. Let's create a file named delete contact button.js. So let's start out within this particular component. Let's start out by making it a client-side component, and we'll bring in React. And I want to have a trash can icon represent the delete button. So we'll use React icons for it. I'm going to pass in or also include a toast notification when we successfully delete a contact. We'll need the delete contact action that we just created. And then now we want to add in the delete contact function. So within it, or excuse me, first we want to pass in the contact because we want to capture the contact's ID. Then we'll create a function named handle delete, which will be asynchronous. We'll start out by preventing the default behavior and then including a try catch block. For the try portion, we want to utilize the delete contact function and pass in the contact ID. Then if everything is successful, we want to utilize or pass in a successful toast notification that the contact is deleted successfully. And we'll refresh the page because this is on the home page and I want the page to refresh. And inside of the catch portion, if we get an error, we'll log it to the console, and we'll also send a toast notification. Now inside of the return statement, we'll start with a empty div and we'll pass in the form. The form will have the on submit handler, and we'll be using the handle delete function that we just created. We'll pass in a input that'll be hidden. This input will have the ID of the contact that we are looking to delete, and the default value for it will be the contact.id. We'll add in a button, and this button will wrap around the FI trash can delete icon. That way we can delete, or that way we can use the button, or the icon, excuse me, as a button to delete the contact. So let's just go ahead and save this file and go back to the contact list. And inside of the contact list, let's get access to the delete contact button. And then in it, we're going to pass in a contact because that's what we are passing to it. And then if we take a look at the table, we now see the delete icon. And let's just try to delete one of the contacts. You see that the notification came up and now the contact is no longer there. So it is working successfully. The pagination went back down to 1. The pagination went back down to 1. and we only have 5 contacts listed. So let's add another one to make sure that it's working. Perfect. Okay, so we'll add 2 more contacts, and you can see that they are on the second page. And if we attempt to delete one, let's just delete Jose. We see that we got the delete notification, and that is working properly. So with the full CRUD functionality in place, the only other thing we have left to do is to deploy it. And I think I have one more deploy instance on Vercel. So let's take a stab at it. So back on Vercel, I'm going to click on Overview. Well, before I do that, excuse me, I need to add this to Git. So let's do that first. So inside of the page.js, in the scripts object under lint, let's add post install, and we'll set that equal to Prisma generate. Let's save it. We can close this file, and this file. And now we want to click on the source button, and we want to commit this to our GitHub. So I'm just going to name this first commit and click on commit. And then we want to publish the branch, and I'm going to make it public and give it a few minutes to finish updating. So it says that it is successful. So now we'll go back to Vercel, and we'll bring in a new project. And we see the GitHub that we just created, cbook2. Click on import. The project name, I'm going to keep it as is. And let's add in the environment variables. So let's go back to our text editor, click on .env, and we can just copy this Postgres database information here. Go back to Vercel, paste it into the key, and then we'll click on deploy. And we'll give it a few moments. Okay, and we got redirected to the congratulations page. So let's check it out. And if we click on it, we see that we are on the Vercel cook or cbook.2 Vercel app. And you can see that we have the fave icon that we created, and we have the contact book. And if we delete a contact, we see we're still getting the notification that it's updating here. If we try to search functionality, it appears to be working properly. Let's just create a contact to make sure it's working. So I'm gonna go Raven at AOL.com, click submit, and it appears that it is working. So we have a simple CRUD application live on the internet. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, feel free to give me a like and also consider subscribing. Any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Love you, man.